sweetly came up to me and said, Father Gregory, you got to bring him some relief.
Yeah.
So I put my good hat on now.
Okay, good. Yeah, we need some good news.
Well, it's
Jesus growing.
see, from my point of view, while this is hard, I know this is hard. From my point of view, it's all very good news. Not because the numbers are cheerful, but because I think it's always advantageous to know what the struggle is that we're having. You got to know what the problem is before you can solve it.
Yes.
And the thing of it is, and it's when I say something like, for example, we're really reaching the point of a demographic crisis. As hard as that is to hear, it is so much easier to hear that on this side of the crisis. Really and truly, I spent 10 years in the Greek Archdiocese. I understand why people say a lot of things to say about the Greek Archdiocese. I understand the struggles and this and that. But the fact of the matter is, they're the largest community, for good or ill, in the Orthodox Church. So really and truly, if they collapse, the rest of us will follow in short order. So we this is not, it's kind of like when the new president comes on. When President Obama was elected, people were like, oh, I hope he fails. I say, I don't want a failed president. Now President-elect Trump, oh, I hope he fails. No, I don't want him to fail. I don't want a failed president. I don't agree with either man. It is possible to disagree with both of them, but I don't want either of them to fail because it's not good for the country. It's not good for parishes to fail. It's not good for jurisdictions to fail. So we need to do what we need to do to sustain each other, and we need to keep in mind that Jesus started with 12. And in 3 centuries, had taken over the world. We're much more than 12. We have greater resources. So this is not an insurmountable challenge. Quite the contrary. I think it's really helpful. When I was talking to people in the parish council last night, one of the things I mentioned is, and I mentioned it here as well, what's necessary for the health and the future of the church is to change the expectations that you have as laity. You need to expect more from the church. And by the church, I mean bishops, primarily bishops and priests. You have a good priest in Father Hans. So I can say that without fear of causing unnecessarily ruffled feathers. But like I said, someone called me this week, and their parish priest preached a 20-minute sermon on 20 things your dog needs you to know. Yeah. I love dogs. I really do. I agree with St. Anthony. I wish I were the man my dog thought I was. But sermon on dogs. I'm not going to give you that one. So this though is our practical challenge. Less than half of Orthodox Christians are certain that a personal relationship with God is even possible. Most of us have an understanding of God that doesn't even suggest the possibility that you can fall in love with God. And I'll tell my own spiritual children this. Father Gregory, what's evangelism? Evangelism is matchmaking. I introduce people to Jesus so that they'll fall in love with him. I want them to fall in love with the God who is in love with them. But if that God isn't personal, or if I don't know that God is personal, then I don't know if he can love me. If I don't know that he can love me, then I can't communicate that possibility to someone else. You get it? St. Ignatius of Antioch in his letter to the Romans says, it's not merely that I want to be called a Christian, but actually to be one. All the things that we've been talking about, all the challenges that we've been facing, they're not unique to the 21st century. They've been a concern from the beginning. It's always been hard to be a Christian in anything more than name. And St. Ignatius of Antioch is writing at the beginning of the 2nd century, about between 90 and 110 AD. Always been hard. But the upside is that faith is a journey, and the goal of that journey is, among other things, to grow in the awareness of God's love for us. This is why I don't need to worry about where someone is, what their starting point is. It doesn't matter to me whether they're Orthodox or not Orthodox, Christian, non-Christian, unaffiliated, atheist, lesbian. I've never actually talked to a homosexual more than 3 times who at the end of the fourth session has decided that they're not gay. I am not a person you want to talk to if you're committed to being homosexual. I'm not sure why they decide they're not gay anymore, but okay. But to actually be a Christian doesn't mean that we don't sin, but we know we're loved by God and that God loves the people we meet every day. That second thing is so important. It isn't just enough that we tell people that God loves them. We need to know that God loves everyone we meet. When I was a deacon, the priest I served with gave me very good advice. He said, "Oh, Father Gregory, being a priest is the easiest job in the world. Put your cassock on in the morning and go through the rest of the day treating other people as if you were a decent human being." It always surprises people that I smile. Yeah, it does. It's like, "Hey, how are you? Good to see you." There was a woman on the plane next to me. She and her teenage daughter were flying down to Florida for the weekend, and we were talking about it just as we were landing. And at one point, she pops her head up and says, "Golly, I wish I had started to talk to you when we took off. I was so tired I took a nap. That was a mistake. I should have been talking to you." Hey, not hard. I'm a decent human being, or at least I can pretend to be for 2.5 hours. Unfortunately, if we don't talk among ourselves about what it means to be loved by God, if we don't take an interest in where each other is spiritually, then we risk leaving each other in the situation of being Christian in name only. Father Hans is one of 3 or 4 priests that I check in with on a regular basis, for no particular reason except to say, "Here I am, how am I doing, how are you doing?" And it's really very low-key. Conversations end up going on for a long time sometimes, but that's okay.
Well, they're good ones.
Yeah, they are, but we have to check in with each other. We really do. Put another way, if we don't talk about the spiritual life and encourage each other to be disciples of Jesus Christ, we risk leaving people unaware of God's love for them. That whole thing about college students and what's easier or not easier, when I offer them a straight economic analysis of their own behavior, they're, in the best possible sense of the term, they're shattered. It never strikes them that there's an entire industry that has developed to subsidize their being sexually active outside of marriage. But when you present that information to them in sort of a dispassionate fashion, they're like, "What? Yeah, there's an alternative here as well," which is even the best part. But we can't risk leaving people unaware of God's love for them. And again, that's the alternative to being a part of the church. It's not like in the church there are good people and outside the church there are good people. In the church there are people who know they're loved by God, and outside there are people who need to know they're loved by God, but who don't know it yet, or who have only a vague idea or a misunderstanding. That's our job, and if we don't do that, we're going to see these numbers get worse. So while the situation is serious, it isn't by any stretch of the imagination hopeless. Like I said, my wife's a lawyer. She says, "You know, if you'd gone to law school, you'd be a defense attorney." Yeah, she's probably right. I've worked as I've been a police chaplain in the past, and I'm a law and order guy. But honestly, someone in front of me is like, "Yeah, we're going to figure out how to get you past this. It's okay. Oh, sure, it was a mass murder, but we can come up with something." I'm sort of constitutionally optimistic or hopeful. It is serious, but it's not hopeless. What we need to keep in mind is that we are called to be followers and disciples of Christ, men and women of faith who shape our lives around the teaching and person of Jesus Christ. I've said that at least 3 times in every presentation this morning today. Can't say it enough. And this means more than just a formal adherence to the teaching and practices of the church. That's important. That's essential. Because without the formal practice of the church, we don't know where the boundaries are. Okay? That's important. It's really hard for me to have a conversation with a college student who doesn't understand why getting drunk and hooking up is not good. I gotta convince them not to get, actually I don't try to convince them not to hook up, I try to convince them not to get drunk. I find if they're not getting drunk, they don't want to hook up because they don't actually enjoy hooking up. That's why they get drunk. This is what you do when you're doing something you don't enjoy. You anesthetize yourself. Nobody goes to the dentist and say, no Novocaine, just drill straight. I love the drill. You know? The analogy to what I'm talking about is conjugal fidelity. You know, it's one thing not to cheat on your spouse, but that doesn't make you a good spouse. It just means you're not doing what you shouldn't do. Without intimacy between husband and wife, there isn't any real fidelity. And remember, vice is the absence of virtue. So the problem isn't that there are bad people on the other side of the door. There are people who don't have the virtue of love for God. And the absence of that virtue of love is fear, because perfect love casts out fear. And if you think about your friends who are basically secular individuals, they are often very fearful. Second, while the demographic data is sobering, there really are some potential bright spots. Like I said, we have fewer faithful, but more clergy, more parishes, more monastic communities. And if we really exploit that, that can work to our advantage. I have a friend, and in fact, she did a lot of the research that eventually went into this. She's a Roman Catholic woman, and she came to my parish in Ohio, and she said, you know what's amazing, Father Gregory, is that your Orthodox parishes are like the medieval Catholic ideal. You know, it's these small communities gathered around the celebration of the Eucharist. In fact, she's so impressed with this that she asked if I wanted to go and work with the Anglican Diocese of London, because they have small group parishes, and they need someone who actually understands what a small group parish looks like. Well, I'm Orthodox. You know, 200 for us is huge. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if I want to go. My friend said, oh, but they're Anglicans and they're strange and it'll be frustrating. My response was, yes, but I will be frustrated and irritated in London. You know, so.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah, if I'm going to have if I need to, I can go to a show, I can go to a pub, I can go to Harrods. I'll go to the museum, I'll go to the museum, that's it. I'll go to the museum, not the pub. But, you know, it's win-win. But, you know, if we have these smaller parishes, what we can do is we can seize the opportunity and focus on discipleship and growth and personal holiness. That really is the takeaway. The takeaway is not that our numbers are frightening. The takeaway is we can do something extraordinary with what we have. Because at this point, it's very difficult. I mean, there's still lots of marginal Orthodox Christians in the church, but the marginal numbers are getting smaller and smaller just by natural attrition. They just walk away. So how do we move forward? Well, because we took a break in the wrong place, I'm going to skip ahead, and I'm going to talk about the concrete steps to holiness. You with me?
Yes.
Do you understand that the news is sobering but not bad? St. Gregory of Nyssa, I'll tell you briefly in the sermon tomorrow, but he started when he was made bishop, his diocese was smaller than than this gathering. I think he had a dozen people in his diocese. He did okay. In this last talk, I want to talk to you about the ascetical I want to talk to you about prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and manual labor as the practical means of Christian discipleship. We'll then look at the monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience poverty, chastity, obedience, and stability as the tangible fruits of discipleship. This is one of the things that we often do very poorly in the Orthodox Church as a practical matter. We say to people, well, just attend the services. And if you just attend the services, you'll learn what you need to learn. I love the services. I think the services are beautiful. But the fact of the matter is attending the services in and of themselves is just not sufficient. We need the ascetical life, but we also need, and this is what we'll get from monasticism, some touchstones to see how we're doing, okay? Because if I don't know how I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going. That's why I have a GPS, because I have no sense of direction. So I do whatever the GPS tells me, which is bad in Chicago because I can't get a satellite, so I end up circling the block for hours. Especially as we go through the disciplines, the ascetical disciplines and the vows, ask yourself how what you hear matches or not with your experience. And especially in the Q&A, want to try to talk about this a little bit more concretely just to give you some practice. Okay, you with me? Ascetical disciplines, the path of personal discipleship. The book I'm writing for Acton, this is the last half, or the last section. Prayer. St. Augustine says that God knows what we need before we ask Him. And so has no need for us to tell Him what we want, since, after all, He can't fail to know it. So when God inspires us to prayer, Augustine says, He does so that we may be able to receive what He is preparing to give us. This is as good a summary as I can get about why we pray personally in our homes and liturgically in church. We're preparing our hearts to receive what God has already decided to give us. You see the difference in that? It's not a matter of petitioning God to give me something I want, but of getting ready, Augustine says, to receive a gift that is very great. Because ultimately the gift that God wants to give each of us is Himself. And we need to pray, I need to pray, because my capacity is too small and limited to receive. Through prayer, Augustine says, we spur ourselves on to deepen our desire for union with God. In other words, prayer teaches me to desire God more and more. It makes my heart larger. And prayer also, he says, teaches us to desire unceasingly that life of happiness which is eternal, and ask of Him who is able to give it. Prayer opens my heart to God, not so that He can enter into my heart, however, but so that I can enter into Him. Again, this doesn't matter whether we're talking about personal prayer or liturgical prayer. It's about changing my heart so that I can enter into the life of God. It's not about getting stuff. It's about coming to desire intimacy, communion with God, and then going in and receiving that intimacy by joining my life to His. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes I think sometimes we do odd things when we pray. I see this with a lot of Orthodox Christians. I used to do this as well. I would get out my prayer book and I would go to my prayer corner, my icons corner, and I would stand up very straight and make the sign of the cross with great precision. And I would open my prayer book and I would read the prayers, and it was very precise. And at one point I realized I'm standing at attention before God. There's something wrong with that. When does a child stand at attention in front of his father?
When they've done something wrong.
Bingo! Suddenly I realized, wait a minute. My body posture, the way I'm approaching, my attitude, is I'm not coming in to enter into the warm embrace of my Father. I'm coming afraid. So we have to lay aside that fear and understand what we're really doing. You got it? fasting. Eating is given to us as a means, as part of our communion with God. You remember what happens at the beginning in the book of Genesis? What does God say to Adam and Eve? What does he give them?
Don't coffee.
No, he doesn't give them coffee. What does he say to them? What does he give them? Seed-bearing. He gives them every seed-bearing tree. He gives them food to eat. He gives them food to eat. Actually, he says, I give you every herb that yields seed, which is of the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, so that it shall be for food. I don't know, maybe God is Greek. He uses food to say, I love you. Food is the sign. It's the experience of God's love for us made tangible.
Would you like a cookie?
No, I'm good. No, I did once eat three Easter dinners. Yeah, it was bad. I was really sick. But in fact, God gives us food as a way of expressing his great love for us. And our consumption of food in the garden is, in fact, how we receive that love, enter into that love. But with the gift of food, God also gives us one negative commandment. Do you remember what he tells us to do? What's the one thing we're not supposed to do? It's about eating as well.
Eating the apple, forbidden fruit.
Right, we're not supposed to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. We had one job.
We screwed it up.
We screwed it up. Don't eat that. And you know what? We had one job. We had one tiny little job. Keep the fast. Don't eat that. And we did. And that's where all our troubles begin, by not keeping the fast. See, we sometimes think that fasting is added on to our life as Orthodox Christians as a response to sin. It's not. Fasting has been there from the beginning. And according to a hymn, one of the hymns from the last Sunday before Lent, through eating, Adam was cast out of paradise, and so as he sat in front of it, he wept, lamenting with a pitiful voice, saying, Woe is me that I have suffered, wretch that I am. I transgressed one commandment of the Master, and now I am deprived of every good thing. Our unwillingness to fast is what undid us. So when we talk about fasting in the church, it's not a punishment. It's a return to the beginning. It's an attempt to return, however briefly, however imperfectly, to that original innocence. Asceticism in general and fasting in particular is not something added on to human life. It's not an afterthought. It's not a response or a reaction to sin. It's there from the beginning. To fast is to return to human life as it was the beginning, and to begin to acquire a bodily knowledge of God and his love. This is one of the great things about the life of my own patron, St. Gregory Palamas. He argued vehemently, with great passion, great conviction, that in fact we could have a tangible physical experience of God's love. He said we can see the divine light with our fleshly eyes. But this is what fasting is about, is teaching us to have a bodily experience of God. Are you with me so far? See why you had to go through all the stuff, though, about the stats, because you start with this and people just nod. It's like, yeah, that's sweet, okay. No, this is the undoing of everything that we just saw. Actually, not doing this is why we have all the bad numbers. Through prayer and fasting, I reshape my heart and make it more sensitive and responsive to God's grace. The ascetical disciplines of almsgiving and manual labor allow me to shape the world around me. That's different. Prayer and fasting shapes my heart. Almsgiving and manual labor shapes the world. And it changes my relationship with others, especially the poor. in a way that reflects Jesus Christ. The way is that prayer and fasting sanctify the soul. Almsgiving and manual labor are the means by which I sanctify the material world and therefore human society. In a general sense, our vocation in baptism is to shape the world so that we bring it more in conformity to the gospel. That's our job. You asked about politics in the church. The reason the church gets involved in politics is not because the church is Democrat or Republican or libertarian. Everyone has a preference. Not conservative or liberal or progressive, but because it's our job to shape the world according to the gospel. And if we're not shaping the world according to the gospel, we're not shaping society according to the gospel, we're not doing our job. That's what we have to do. And we have to do it because we're bodily creatures. You know, we have to live in society. You know, the fact of the matter is, and again, with college students, this is a good example. If the university culture is not shaped according to the gospel, it will be shaped. It will default to being shaped by sin. Now, at UW, it happens to be about sexuality, but in the 20s, it was eugenics. UW was a source for eugenic propaganda. Yeah, there are poor people out there, and they need to be sterilized. Actually, at Nuremberg, most of the defense of eugenics was by appealing to American progressives from the teens, 20s and 30s. You know, so the shape, you know, the issue, the way the world is misshapen will change. It might be sexuality, it might be racism, it might be something else down the line, but it's always going to be deformed unless Christians are willing to shape the world. We have to shape the world. We have to shape society. You know, the problem is that we're most of us almost unconsciously evangelical Christians. Doesn't matter how long we've been Orthodox, if we've been Orthodox our entire life, almost all of us have grown up on a steady cultural diet that says salvation is by faith alone. And so any suggestion that there are works that go along with faith just makes us a little anxious. But St. Cyprian of Carthage says that prayer alone is fruitless and ineffectual unless it is accompanied by almsgiving. Think about that for a minute. Cyprian is saying that unless I give money to the poor, God only hears my prayer if I give money to the poor.
False.
No. That is not false. That is the patristic teaching. There is not every father of the church. All the fathers are unanimous, East and West, Greek and Latin, Syriac. Salvation requires that we store up treasures in heaven by giving materially to the poor, and if we do not give materially to the poor, God does not hear our prayer. This does not, however, mean that we are proponents of the Great Society, which is a different question. But we are obligated. God will not hear our prayer unless we give to the poor. Only prayers, Cyprian says, with almsgiving ascend to God with the merits of our labor urging upon him. Even earlier in the second epistle of Clement, we hear that at the last judgment, almsgiving will be judged a good thing, even as repentance from sin. Fasting is better than prayer, Clement says, but almsgiving is better than both. So it's good to pray, it's good to fast, it's better to care for the poor. Now,
does the poor include the sick?
Yep, it includes everybody in need. It's very interesting. The fathers of the church say that not only do the rich have an obligation to the poor have an obligation to the rich. They're both bound by a similar requirement to give alms. The rich give money. The poor give kind words, gratitude, and prayer. So the poor man doesn't have money to give, but he can say thank you. He can say a kind word, you are a generous man. And he can say, Lord, have mercy on you, may God bless you. And by the way, If the poor person doesn't respond in that way to the rich person who helps him, then the poor person's prayers aren't heard, and the poor person's salvation is at risk. Those of you who follow politics, you will now see this is really a radically different notion than sort of the Great Society or how we generally think about philanthropy as a secular reality. This idea that someone on welfare owes a kind word, gratitude, and prayer to the caseworker that's absolutely foreign. But when we delegate care for the poor, that radical way to the government, we deny ourselves and the poor person an opportunity for salvation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. But no, almsgiving can be anyone in need. And there are a variety. Sometimes it's material, sometimes it's illness, sometimes it's social need. Honestly, that's the reason I smile and I try to be decent to human beings. Yeah, it's not much almsgiving, but it's what I got. Really, truly. Go to the grocery store. Next time you go to the grocery store, smile.
Messes people up.
It does. It's like,
Can't handle.
I was like, oh no. You gotta work at it. I have taught the cashiers at our grocery store. I am going to come in. I'm going to smile. I'm going to be pleasant, and I'm
And everyone's on social media, so you lose that eye contact because people are looking down.
Not me.
Well.
I look into the eye. I go to the coffee shop. I say to the clerk behind the counter, "Hey, you look tired. Take a minute. Let's pretend I don't know what I want."
That means you're an anatomical anomaly too.
I am. Oh yeah. Oh no. I have a friend who's a physician. We were having dinner one night. He said, "So you're kind of like an outlier for clergy." I said, "Yeah, paint me orange, light me on fire. I couldn't be more an outlier." I like outliers. Outliers are good. They tell me where the limits are. But to come back, almsgiving, it is part of what we have to do, but it covers a broad range, not just money. Okay. Now, on the other hand, just in fairness, you can't say, "Well, yeah, I've got extra money, but saying a kind word is good too." Yeah. Don't cheat.
I'm learning something today. I never underestimate the giving. It's essential in our faith.
Yeah.
I just didn't know that it was a prerequisite for.
It is a prerequisite for salvation. St. John Chrysostom is painfully clear. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, actually, along those lines, I keep coming back to the illustration that Christ uses where he gives you that moment in heaven where the sheep and the goats are separated, and he does not ask if you accept the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior.
No, he doesn't actually.
And never, not actually anywhere. But what he does do is he say, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. In other words, did you act like me when I was there? Mm-hmm. Were you walking in my footsteps?
Yeah. Just in the interest of keeping you up to date with contemporary scholarship, there is some question as to whether or not the sheep and the goats are separated based on their care for the poor or their care for the evangelists.
Okay.
But in either case, the point is, there's someone in need. What'd you do?
That's still the question you're going to be asked. That's what matters.
Yeah. At some point, I'm going to be asked, what'd you do when you could have done something?
Since we're still on almsgiving,
Or manual labor.
well, we're off.
I'm trying to segue back
Pay attention
a little bit.
Okay. Mary's on the next slide. With almsgiving, you experience a lot of people that'll write a check,
Right.
and there's no second thought about it.
Nope.
Can you give us a little bit more of a definition of almsgiving? Well, how does it help my soul if I just scribble my name on a piece of paper and it does not affect me in one way or another, other than my taxes?
No, it's not manual labor. I know.
All right.
Well, I have my secretary fill out the check.
Yeah. First of all, there's nothing. First of all, there are two things. First of all, almsgiving and stewardship are separate. You do not fulfill your almsgiving does not fulfill your obligation to be stewards of the parish. Different question. But there's nothing wrong with writing a check to either situation. In fact, in some ways, there's something to be said for writing a check, because depending on where you send that check, you can actually leverage your money and you can do more value. the difficulty becomes when we talk about the fathers of the church and almsgiving. How to put this? We're very concerned that the poor today be middle class tomorrow, right? We want to lift the poor out of poverty. That's not a notion for the church fathers. For the church fathers, you know, you temporarily alleviate some of the poor's suffering, but you don't actually try to make them not poor. And they had no problem with that kind of delegation of funds. For example, the emperor would give lots of money to the church, but he wouldn't necessarily go out giving money to individuals. Though there are some saints, I mean, that's one of the things that's really extraordinary about some of the saints who are also emperors or, you know, high government officials. One of the things that's noteworthy about them is they actually went out and talked to poor people, because the expectation was you didn't have to do that, you just had to make the funds available and they would be dispersed by the church. So there's nothing wrong. That check is not necessarily wrong. You know, and I think there's something to be said, you know, for that kind of a reminder that I'm doing that. So that I think that can slowly change our disposition towards our own wealth and our own relationship to other people. But you know, if you're able to do it, I think there's something to be said for actually, you know, working with people who are in material need. Now, what we have to avoid, and it's my favorite phrase, like there's research on this. There's this tendency of becoming sort of philanthropic tourists or missionary tourists. You know, like we take a youth group to well, actually, I was not Guatemala because that's sort of an ongoing thing, but among evangelical Christians, they'll take youth group mission trips, and they'll just, you know, basically parachute into a village, do something for a week, and then go home. Life-changing for the kids, but doesn't really do anything for the people that they've cared for. So, you know, we need to be. That's why, in some ways, actually writing the check might actually, depending on where you write it, to whom you write it, might not be the worst thing, because a lot of times it's difficult to know how to respond effectively, you know, to someone who is in need. When I lived in Pittsburgh, there was this guy in the street, Richard. He saw me walk and said, "Hey, Father, how about $5 so I can buy beer?" Absolutely. Gave him $5, squatted down on the sidewalk. We had a nice chat, and you know, we chatted for 6 or 8 months whenever he saw me, and then he just, I don't know what happened to him. He moved on. But you know, if you have the ability to do so, I think there's something to be said for that. You know, using your wealth, whether it's material or social, but especially or intellectual, but using that wealth to, you know, in a human contact, one-to-one contact. But I don't think we should feel an obligation to do that, because frankly, it's not as easy as people think it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it isn't easy, especially in our society today.
Yeah.
It's hard to have that contact. And growing up in the Orthodox Church and having been a member in several growing up, there may be a little bit of a drive here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, write a check for this cause,
Mm-hmm.
support the church. But going back to the almsgiving that you see the church fathers would talk about and do, like St. Basil,
Yeah.
we don't see that in our churches here.
Yeah, no, and it is one of the reasons that we're well, there are a whole host of concerns, and I don't want to get too much. I don't want to be too policy wonky, but it is one of the reasons we do have some of the difficulties we have in America is that we came here and built parishes. We didn't build schools. We didn't build hospitals. We didn't build universities. You know, we have like an occasional nursing home or personal care home. I got assigned to an OCA parish in Maryland that built they built low-income housing for people, basically with certain sort of physical disabilities, basically elderly housing, which was great, except they didn't know how to run it properly. So I showed up about 3 weeks before the Inspector General did from HUD. And it's like, wow, okay, someone owes me a gold cross for this one. because we dodged the federal investigation, but, so there are a lot, it's really very complex to help the poor. In Madison, the Crisis Pregnancy Center, for example, can't give out cribs anymore because they changed regulations as to what kinds of cribs you can have. So all the used cribs that are out there, you can pass them to a family member, but you can't donate them. So the Crisis Pregnancy Center can't give out cribs. But I think it would be good if we did things like had schools. Or, yeah. What I've found, and then we'll go to manual labor, what I've done in parishes in the past is I found people who, especially people who were sort of professionally involved in philanthropic work or education with high-risk populations. That would be poor black inner city kids, but that was in social work. And what I've done is I've gone to them and said, I know what you're doing. What do you need to do your job better? I remember this one Carpatho-Russian parish in Ohio. They had a number of school teachers who taught in the inner city. And I said, what do you need? And they said, well, backpacks, winter clothes, school supplies, all that. So I went to the parish and said, hey, you got some of the girls who grew up in the parish and they're now adult women and school teachers, they have their kids, it would help them do their job if you donated like backpacks with school supplies. And it was great. All of these little Carpatho-Russian grandmothers who would probably ordinarily be terrified to see a black person in church, went out to Kmart with their credit cards and just, boom, boom, they just started buying backpacks and filling them up. And when winter came, Baba is like, what do you mean? She didn't even wait to be asked. They didn't even wait to be asked. There was like this brigade of grandmothers who just went out and bought winter clothes for kids. But it changed everybody. Changed the school, changed the parish, and they, and I think that's maybe in our society, that's like the best way to do it, is to find the people who are involved in philanthropy and education, and then support and sustain them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Very much.
Like you're a physician, you go to the Dominican Republic. You should be helping him. Like when you go to the DR, people should be praying for you. You should go with oil from the tomb of St. Cosmos and Damian, or maybe unmercenary healers, teachers, things like that. Does that make sense? All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Manual labor, like I said. There's a great story in the Desert Fathers. Brother comes to the abbot and says, what am I to do? I find it painful to sell what I make. The abbot replied, well, Abba Socios and others used to sell what they made. There's no harm in this. When you sell anything, say straight out the price of the goods. If you want to lower the price a little, you may, and so you will find rest. But the brother said, I have enough for my needs and from other sources. Do you think I need worrying about making things to sell? The old man replied, however much you have, do not stop making things. Do as much as you can, provided that the soul is undisturbed. Now that's really an interesting thing if we think about it. The monk comes and says to the abbot, I have everything I need. Do I need to keep working with my hands? Do I need to keep making baskets and mats? And the abbot says, yes, as a matter of fact, you do. And you need to keep selling them. But I have enough money. Not the point. The point is your manual labor is good for your soul, and we know it's good for your soul because it's of tangible benefit to other people. We know it's of tangible benefit to other people because they take your mat and they give you a coin. Manual labor is not just a matter of doing things with our hands, but doing things with our hands, doing physical labor that is of tangible benefit to other people. Think about all the things you do. I mean, who cooks? Who are the cooks? I love to cook. My wife is thrilled. It's like, it's like, she's like, my husband loves to cook. I do. The closer I get to a writing deadline, the better we eat. Because I just panic. If anyone write professionally? Yeah. you're doing a lot, you're, at some point in the process, I am filled with feelings of self-hatred and reproach. Really and truly, I can't imagine that anyone would want anything that I would ever cite, because I am.
You think what you write is just garbage,
It
even
is.
when it's good.
Garbage is polite, you know. So what I do is I compensate by cooking, because I feel better about myself. But you know, the fact of the matter is, our manual labor has to be of value to someone else. In our economic system, that means our manual labor needs to actually turn a profit. We need to get money for it, which is why I don't think writing academic articles counts as manual labor, because no one reads them. And I read them, and most of them are garbage. So I read them like a social scientist. I read the abstract, the introductory paragraph, and the conclusion. And then everything in the middle is just, yeah. If I see a sigma, moving on. Got stats in it, I don't read it. You know, the thing of it is, in the monastic life, they aim for economic self-sufficiency, but what that means is that they try to become a part of the market around them. They didn't want to be dependent on handouts. That's why their manual labor was profitable, turned a profit. So our manual labor needs to be of value to other people. It's not enough to say, I love gardening. You know, someone else needs to get some value from that. Are you beginning to see what's going on then in the ascetical life? Prayer, fasting, almsgiving, manual labor, they all actually have an evangelical component.
How does the manual labor integrate with the life of the parish?
A lot of times it doesn't. But, well, I mean, what does the parish do that's of tangible benefit to other people? I got into a stink on Facebook. There was a question about clergy losing their housing allowance, you know, about the housing allowance. The money that you give, congregation gives, a certain portion of the priest or pastor's salary can be designated a housing allowance, and so it's not tax deductible. And the idea was that because the priest had to live next to the rectory or something. And you know, the thing that people forget is that the reason that churches have nonprofit status in America is twofold. One, because the power of the tax is the power to destroy, so keeping the churches tax-free kept them from being coerced by taxed out of existence by the state. But the other idea was churches were tax-free or nonprofits because they provided tangible benefit to the larger community. And there's some data that, at least with the black churches, that is the case. But the fact of the matter is that frankly, a lot of churches in America really are not of any they're really not of particular value to people outside the immediate congregation. You know, a lot of times congregations do not really add value to the community.
But they should.
Yeah, I mean, our tax code assumes that I'm not even, you notice I often default to economics because, you know, people will give me an argument about theology. But when I explain the law or the economics, ouch, that just hurts. But that's the problem. This says that we need to be of tangible value to people on the other side of the door of our church. Not just that we evangelize other people, but that people are materially, tangibly better off because we're in the neighborhood.
You see the Protestant churches, maybe, I'm going to use just that as an example, they do have food drives, soup kitchens, services, and they're very structured in the benefit that they try to provide to the greater community.
Right.
Much more so than the Orthodox.
It is, yeah. I mean, you know, Catholics have, you know, parochial schools.
Catholic charities.
Yeah. Though I would be remiss if I didn't point out that it actually doesn't work as easily, as well as people think. Actually, who do seem to do generally a very, well, see, I was going to say the black churches in the inner city do a good job, but a lot of that gets hooked up with government grants and things. So a lot of times when religious institutions are of benefit to the community is because they're retailers of government aid, so they're sort of a pass-through. So,
So what should we do
what do you want?
to do the 4 things you just talked about?
Pick one.
Food drives.
Sure. This is what I would suggest is, well, I mean, this is what I would suggest. Partner with someone in the greater community, in the wider community.
We do.
Great. The parish I had in Ohio, they had a food bank. Absolute disaster. They didn't have enough space. They didn't have anybody who knew how to run a food bank. So either the food would spoil, or they would give too much away. So finally, I came in and I just shut the food bank down, and said, all right, anything that's still edible, bring to Salvation Army. You want to work in the food bank? Great. Go out volunteer at Salvation Army. And someone said, but we're Orthodox. Yes, there is not an orthodox way to hand someone a can of soup. And frankly, we don't have the resources to run a food bank. So look at your again. Start with self-knowledge. What are the resources that you actually have on hand? I mean, you have school teachers, you have law enforcement.
When one is a professional, how would they integrate manual labor into what they do?
Well, it depends on what they're doing. I mean, my wife's an attorney. Not a lot of manual labor, a lot of paperwork.
Right.
In my wife's case, her contribution to the life of the church is making sure that I don't go hungry.
You're the cook, though.
I am the cook.
Oh, you mean because she works,
Right.
she provides for your sustenance so
Right.
that you can provide
Yeah.
others. But you said manual labor, make something with your hands. Is she doing that being an attorney?
Like taking Bruno cases or
No,
something.
she has.
Well, then you're still not working for your hands. That's more almsgiving because you're doing something good for
Yeah,
somebody
well, no,
else.
but I mean, she does things like, she does stuff around the house and that kind of stuff, which is of value. Certainly, I find of value, but
But that's different than what the monks make
yeah.
in
Oh, sure.
monasteries.
Yeah. Yeah, the point is not, the point is not necessarily to raise calluses, but to generate value for other people, and to be of real service to other people.
Without glorifying, there are a lot of churches do that to glorify the church themselves, or to look good
Right.
in church, or to attract more people. They do it for selfish reasons. We have to be
Curiously-
careful with that too.
Curiously, the Holy Apostle Paul dealt with that in one of his epistles, because some people preach the gospel out of a desire for profit.
So
And then he says, and it doesn't really matter because the gospel's being preached. You know what? If someone's giving out food to the poor to glorify themselves, that's between them and Jesus. The poor guy, someone gets bread that day. For example, there's a number of economically distressed neighborhoods in Madison, poor black neighborhoods. I've been in Madison way too long. I just default now to that language. But I have told people, like, look, there are a lot of guys in this neighborhood who need full-time jobs that they can use, that they can support their wife and kids on. And if the social cost of that man getting a full-time job is that Bill Gates gets to have another private jet and takes another fabulous vacation, I'm okay with that. I really am. If some guy gets to become even a richer billionaire and it results in all these poor people getting jobs, I say thank God, move on.
That's different than the self-glorification.
You know what? If someone is glorifying himself and feeding poor people and basically, leaving them in relative peace, and their lives are, somewhat better off, and this guy's a jackass, I'm okay with him being a jackass.
Because the poor is.
Because the poor is getting fed.
Yeah.
And a lot of times Americans, it's funny with the Trump election. He's not a good man, flat out. But the reality is, no good people do not become president. You do not get to, and you don't get to the very top of any political system, by being a self-effacing saint. I mean, that's just the, and you know, it doesn't really matter who. I mean, you know, you do bad things to good people. And now we're all, but I mean, this is just the nature of the world. And if Christians do the right thing for the wrong reason, that's a great sin, but the right thing is still getting done.
In
And
the
hopefully
course of
that will change.
Father Hans' travels, he comes across Good Samaritan recipients.
Mhm.
And so we help the Good Samaritan. Does that fall under almsgiving or manual labor?
Yeah, I think you're worrying a little bit too much about it. You're bringing a precision to the conversation that we don't necessarily need to have. Some people are going to be very good at almsgiving. Others are going to be very good at prayer. Some are going to be very good at manual labor. You know, the question is, you look at the, you know, what's really going on? Look at the whole picture. Like I said, I've had parishes that are really good at music, and you know, but really and truly, do not ask them to do anything for the homeless. They're just clumsy. On the other hand, I've had parishes that really and truly, they cannot sing a note. It doesn't matter. They will bring, you know, they'll bring a whole roast chicken dinner.
We'll see it tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, so what again? And then I'll stop with this, and we'll go on to the last part. This is why that whole self-knowledge thing is so important. Because you really need to look at what God has what gifts God has given the community. You know, if for example you're a parish that can produce tangible value through labor for other people by working, say, for Habitat for Humanity, great. That's great, really and truly. But I have walked into congregation. I remember when I was a deacon in my 30s, my wife and I would help sometimes at the parish in Rankin, which is a old bedroom community for the mill community in Pittsburgh. And my wife and I, if you added our ages together and put 10 years on top of that, we would still be the youngest person in the room. You know, this is a congregation in their 70s and 80s, you know, not really a Habitat for Humanity congregation. You know, on the other hand, you have a congregation of a lot of 30-somethings, people in their 40s, who maybe are physically able to do that and, you know, have the time, great. You know, but that's one example. But, you know, if you want to incorporate manual labor as an ascetical discipline for a community, you got to look at who the community is, and then you got to see what the needs are and the resources are in the wider community. Does that make sense? I have a priest friend who says the secret of the spiritual life is there is no secret. I generally find if I focus at somewhat of a not secular in the bad sense, but if I just sort of take a more pragmatic view of things, it works out better. Shall we go on? This is the last little bit, and with the home stretch.